Can we maybe start with hiring practices in our workday? Because it is a lot different than today. I mean, when we were hired mainly because of a reputation. They hired mostly local kids that were great athletes or hard workers in school, and usually somebody on the present fire crew knew them. And so there were no government standards in those first couple of years to say who you could hire and who you couldn't hire. And then our work day, and there were no females either until what, 82, 83, something like that on the crew. But it was kind of almost run like a paramilitary operation. We were told what to wear. We couldn't have long hair, preferably crew cuts. You had to wear these green dickies, shirt and pants during the work day. And when we went to fires, we didn't have crew shirts the first couple of years. And I remember that first year, we lived in an old motel here in Entiat. It was falling apart. And we'd have to get up about 5 o'clock a day because we had to fix breakfast. We had to clean the place. We went out for calisthenics, and we traveled to the work site, whether it be up to the end of the valley 30 miles, before our time started. We're doing, we were unheard of today. Yeah. And a lot of our travel time, I think, to fires was not counted. There was no overtime; it was all straight time. And we didn't think too much about it because that's just the way it was, But thinking about doing calisthenics, and then when we got back to the place where we lived at 5 o'clock, we did more calisthenics. And then after that, we all went out and got drunk, till 2 in the morning. And then we'd get up, for 3 or 4 hours sleep and do it again. I think we were excited. We thought we were the top of the world. And our training consisted, I think, mostly of just passing on knowledge from the old firefighters to the new ones. There were no formal training, no formal fire classes. And most of it was just common sense, and I think we all felt safe most of the time. I never thought of a situation where I was scared of anything except for rocks rolling down the hill or snags at night. But I think our training sufficed for the time. And that's the way it was. We depended a lot on our leaders. We trusted them. And they had our hands full, because I think we were pretty much a bunch of young, smart-ass kids. Didn't know any better, and Chuck was our boss, and he didn't know half of he didn't know half of what we were doing, and he'd hear stories, and he'd deny them because he was proud of his boys, and we were lying to him through our teeth.
That was a few times.
And I think the local sheriff probably had his hands full too, because we're after, they're trying to protect the daughters of Entiat Valley. We had no interest in protecting anybody. But we thought we could do anything with just that bravado and that naivety in a way. It's a camaraderie that kept us together.
One thing in the training that I'd like to bring up, for sure, the 10 standard firefighting orders were learned and observed. And we ran into a lot of problems with the overhead teams because they would not be aware of them, and you try to use us in those manners. Particularly in California, where we were up on a ridge and the fire was below us. That was dead man's play, and we knew it, and we all huddled up and made sure we understood what we were doing so that we stayed safe. And that was before fire safety zones. There was none. If you didn't observe those 10 rules, you were in trouble. And every person that I've ever experienced any problems in fire, they violated those. And even today, unfortunately.
And I think some of the training, like my first training was not on the crew. My first year of firefighting was a summer in Kashmir when they still had a ranger district. And if they had a lightning bus come through, if you're 18 years old, you could go down to the radio station and sit there, and they'd send you out chasing the smoke with somebody who probably knew just a little bit more than you did. And that was pretty much the training for everybody in the district. Anybody who worked in the Forest Service, you know, was trained to use a Pulaski and a shovel, I think. And when there's a fire, everybody ran towards it. It was almost a race to see who could get there first. And kind of exciting in a way.
I'd like to follow up on what Dave said. In the 60s, they were sought-after jobs to be on the hotshot crew. They didn't pay a lot per hour, but pretty much we worked the entire summer. I mean, the days were long, and say Dave would explain the workday, but then often, most nights, we'd be put on standby. Not just for local standby, but something would be going on in Oregon. They'd put the crew on standby, so we'd work 3 or 4 more hours. Sometimes, you know, 9 o'clock. I remember 9 o'clock kind of being a typical time when standby would end, and we pretty much worked our weekends. So even though the wages were low by the end of the summer, you made a pretty nifty little piece of cash, and you really didn't have a lot of days off to spend it. And you were on a hotshot crew, so you understand that. But, yeah, they were sought-after jobs.
But there was no 14-day rotations. You just stayed in the fire until they kept you there. And some summers there were no days off, which made it hard to take care of your personal needs. And it made it hard to manage a crew too, because people you hated to be with each other after a while. You know.
And there were no work-rest guidelines at that time, so the shift kind of ended when you got the task done that you were assigned to do. So that could have been 14 hours, or it could have been way longer than that, and it was on occasion.
I think we should talk a little bit about the gear changes from where we started out and to what they have now. Not only the technology, but we used to have a little Army surplus built with 2 metal canteens on the side. And a file. And headlamp, and a little box of C-rats, if you're lucky, or K-rats back then, with 4 cigarettes in them that I used to trade them. And you got by with that. Once in a while, everybody, or 4 or 5 people would carry a gallon canteen, but 2 quarts of water was your mainstay for the entire day. And of course, we didn't have it. We had a compass. The leaders did. The squad leaders had a vest because we had to carry a few more, and then usually a wool jacket or something strapped onto your butt pack is what we call them. And nowadays, you look at what they're packing now, and it's 30 pounds of a lot of stuff.
I mean, we could move fast. We were 25 people that could build line as fast as we could walk. And the other reason, I think, was the crew structure. We had a foreman, and we had 2 squad leaders. Everybody else had a tool in their hand. Squad leaders also did, We didn't have people, looking around to see if we're safe or anything. The squad leaders were responsible for, and everybody on the crew had that sense. But we had, at least 23 people digging all the time. And like I said, we could build.
That was part of the training.
Well, that's all we did was dig line until we
dug line until we got up to standards, which was set by how I could walk.
Yeah. And here's a famous phrase from Chuck. And you go ahead and say this. He said, "All I want to see is assholes and elbows. You better be bent over, swinging that tool the whole time, or you'd be kicking horse turds down the road." That was his phrase.
I can recall when we were training, we would go up to Navarre Coulee and dig right along that highway there.
It was a prevention.
Yeah, and all of our friends were going to Lake Chelan to swim or water ski or whatever. Here we are out there sucking dust all day. Yeah, that was the...
We were racing.
Yeah.
We never got anything if we won.
You got to go home and take a shower.
Well, there was quite a bit of bragging.
Especially that first year, because one squad started 2 weeks earlier, and the squad that started second beat them. Remember that? In that first year.
Yeah.
That was a big deal.
Chuck was right, too, when he was talking about the DC-3s. The first time I ever rode in an airplane was in a DC-3, and we were headed for Montana, eastern Montana, in the Badlands, and it's named right. It's the Badlands. And we saw this smoke, and we started circling around. We're looking out the window to see where the airport was. And he kept circling. Pretty soon it got lower and lower and lower. We ended up landing in a
Field.
grazing field
I thought we were crashing.
onto a football field. That was in 1966.
Well, there was a
Yeah, I didn't see
C-47
any
sitting down
runways.
at the end of the runway, and his tail was hooked around the goalpost. He come in and made a swing, and it hooked him. And we had to dodge that.
And that's one of the reasons, like you said before, that they went back to a 20-man crew, because we were overloaded. Legally, if they would have checked our airplane, most of the time that we were flying, we had 25 people, each with a 60-pound pack, because we also carried our tools with us, because the one tool that we depended upon was the adze hole, and they should still depend upon it, as far as I'm concerned. But we carried our tools, so we had those 60-pound packs, 25 people. The airplanes were overloaded. You know, we're always worried if we could
I can recall him saying, the pilot coming back and saying, "We're not going to haul you guys anymore. How can you come home with more weight than you took off with? I'm not going to haul you
His
guys."
name was Ed Snyder.
It's called
Yeah,
Stalked the distance and came back, yeah.
Oftentimes in the DC-3s, they stack the line gear on the back, but there wasn't enough space there, so they'd actually stack it in between the seats where you were seated, and people would just walk on it to get all the gear on board.
Yeah.
And that's why the pilots, got to a point where, like Louis said, didn't want to fly the crew anymore because we were heavy.
Yeah.
Well, we got on one time, they had jump seats on the side,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
you pile all the stuff in the middle, so then when you went up there, everybody jumped in and went to sleep on the thing. The plane just shifted around. It didn't move around on the plane.
Chainsaws were put on, not perched.
Yeah.
Fuel was carried by us because that was our reliance. If we going to take the tool, we're going to use the tool, and that was dangerous. In fact,
and
a lot of times guys get oozy because of the smell.
Well, the doors were open, too.
yeah, I was going to say, we flew to down to the Portland area
With no door.
at the middle of the night, but it was midsummer and it was so hot that they said, "Well, we'll take your door off." And they actually took the back door off of that airplane, and we flew to the Portland area. I'm not sure exactly where it was.
Those DC-3 trips, remember from Wenatchee to Los Angeles?
Yeah.
Refuel at, Susanville, California on the way down, Reno, Nevada on the way back up. They were like 9.5 hour total flight.
But with that, though, I never felt in danger, particularly that we
didn't
weren't going
know.
to make it.
Yeah.
I always thought we would do fine with the flight.
They were long, though.
Yeah.
I did. I think the only thing the pilot was concerned about at the intercity up at Winthrop, because we went up there for orientation. The biggest thing he was concerned about was that we not crap in his urinal back there, which was a can, because he had crew that had done that. They got sick and
Was that cabin?
that was just, You
Remember
those
made a
stories
big
we did?
deal about that every year. You didn't care about it overloaded.
Remember, we go up there every year, and he'd give us that spiel, and tell us all the different things we were to do and weren't to do.
The flights were, if we'd known at the time, we probably wouldn't have got in the airplane. I remember one time I was in Reno, we stopped in the airplane, that it was so hot on the runway that the airplane wheel sank into the pavement, right? You
Yeah.
remember that? It sank into the pavement, and they had to, here we are loaded, and he had to, rev his engines up to hop out of that thing.
Remember the time they brought the 727 into Pangborn, and we flew out of that one, they barely got it in here. That was by the flag.
I can recall, too, when we did get to rest at night, it wasn't always ideal. We were in Redmond, Oregon, and slept on a cement floor and where they folded their chutes.
Yeah.
Remember that? That wasn't all that comfortable. And it's, and when we were on fire in our own district at Hornet Creek, and we got up there in the afternoon, and we had to crawl across windfalls for a quarter of a mile, get somebody to crawl up in a tree to see where the smoke was, because the wind was blowing, it was blowing the smoke away. We couldn't see it. Anyway, we started digging line late afternoon. Stopped about 2 o'clock in the morning for 2 hours,
Yeah.
something like
Something
that,
like that.
and slept on the fire line. Actually, on the fire line.
Just put your tool down and went to sleep.
Yeah.
You know why? One of the reasons why we didn't get relieved for about 53 hours, I think it was.
Yeah.
Was because we caught hell down in Oregon for leaving the fire line before a crew relieved us. It was a 6 o'clock shift. And they gave you a bad time, I remember, Chuck, when
Yeah.
you went into the fire camp. I said, why'd you leave? And Chuck said, by God, I'll never leave the fire line again. And that happened at the Hornet Creek.
Yeah.
And so we ended up, because we were cold up there too, it was late summer, early fall.
Well, there wasn't any.
There were cargo chutes. We ended up cutting those cargo chutes out of the trees, cutting the lines off, and I know it made the jump basement.
Yeah,
But we were using it for blankets, that night. And then the next day, when you tried to put your hours in down at fire camp, you caught hell because how could you, do that?
Yeah, how could you make a crew work that long, and damned if you do, damned if you don't attitude.
Yeah.
They had used the excuse of more hours than authorized. And the thing was, these people were stuck out there, and they better be doing something that keeps them safe, and that's building line and being aware of what the fire's doing, because the second night, the fire did blow up and run away from us, but we were in below it. And lo and behold, the officials said, "Where's the crew?" That was their concern at that time, and so I let them know.
Do you remember when we went up on a ridge?
Raven's Roost. Remember Raven's Roost?
Well, I remember up on a ridge one time. I think it was on that fire, and there was paper sleeping bags in this place, and we split them because there wasn't enough. We split them down the seam and opened them up, and then, strange as it seems, 2 or 3 guys would crawl under there and try to keep warm all night, which didn't work all that well.
No.
You remember doing that?
Yeah.
And because the communications weren't very good, a lot of times they did forget that you're out in the fire line. Or they lost track of you.
I think
Because a lot of times the original people in the district would bring you into a fire. They'd send you out in some direction to fight that fire, and then the overhead team that came in, it was never communicated that you were out there. I remember one time we went to, was Utah, and at that time it was Utah fire.
73.
And it was in the dark. It was in the dark. We got there in the dark, and they said, the fire's somewhere up this canyon. And they said, be careful, watch out for the green rattlesnakes. They're really poisonous. Of course, that made us feel really relaxed. And we were out there for over 48 hours. We were up a canyon, cold trailing and digging line along a fire. Little did we know that they were burning out the next canyon over. We spent that night up on a ridge, and we dug line all the next day. We had no water. We had no water for, what was it, Rusty? At least 16 hours. It was a long time. The only way they knew that we were down there was I finally, on my radio, I was able to get on the air attack radio, which was a big no-no. But then I let them know that we were down there, and then, of course, all kinds of panic, and they got us out finally.
Remember walking
In the
all night?
60s, we only had, and I remember when we started, we only had like 2 radios on the crew.
Yeah.
Was it 2?
Two.
I remember you having one, and
2.
Cody having one.
What were they, 22 pounds apiece?
They only have the big battery pack ones, have 24 batteries, D-cells in it. The 2 radios. Now the crews have probably, every guy on the crew probably has a radio, but I think that's overdoing it.
Remember
But
then
they probably
they
have 10 to 15 radios on a crew now.
Then they'd had the radios that you'd get the portables, but they only had 2 channels on them, and so some people would have, like Dingo, a couple of times he had 2 or 3 radios on him, and they'd call on the radio, and he'd have to go through each radio figuring out which one to call.
Yeah.
We had to work close enough that we did all communication orally. We had to be close enough to yell and talk to the next group, or the guy in front of you, or the guy behind you. So, just as safe as it is today, if not safer because of that, I think. Crews stayed more
But you were more conscious
tighter.
of everything.
Well, yeah, it's a communication thing.
Yeah. And if you worked up a canyon fighting fire or just doing project work, you usually had to call a lookout, and they'd relay your messages down to wherever you wanted to go. But anybody remember any time when they were really scared? Or?
No, but I do remember going to Coeur d'Alene. I think landed at Coeur d'Alene or someplace close to Coeur d'Alene on a fire. The bus took us out. And we got out of the bus at 11 o'clock at night
Yeah.
and walked up and over this hill.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Where was that?
I think it was out of Coeur d'Alene.
Anyway, we walked all night up to a ridge top, down the other side. It was smoky because the smoke had laid in the morning, and when it raised about 7 o'clock and we're still digging lime, we could look down there and there was a campground with a paved road to it about a quarter of a mile from us.
That was on the Willamette. That was on the Willamette in Oregon, yeah. I remember that.
We were carrying these 60-pound packs
all night.
Yeah.
all night.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. I thought Chuck was leading us. No. I was just kidding.
But, you know, I mean, stuff like that happens. That's just the way it was. Some days were good and some were less, but we survived it.
And transportation to the fires, I'd say half the time we were in the back of cattle trucks going to a
Yeah.
fire.
Cattle trucks or
Deuce and a half.
6x6.
Yeah.
Deuce and a half.
Yeah.
Remember the helicopters, though, how they used helicopters like mad, and then all of a sudden it started changing. We were down there in Carlsbad Cavern that time there, and we were out there. And they had you go back into camp to get something. They were going to spike us out there, or they were going to take us back in.
That's when we were told to go up the canyon.
Yeah. So we were up there. There was two fires, and they were apart. So then you went back in, and something happened. So you came back out, and we camped there, and the fire burned over us, and we went into the old fire. And but there was something about they were military helicopters, and they weren't supposed to be using them, so they couldn't take us into camp. Remember that? And so then the next day we got up, and we'd get those electric plants real long and we just started lighting hillsides. Remember that? And we were lighting them. I was out there lighting them, and you were trying to get me on the radio, and I was not paying attention. I just kept lighting them.
Imagine that.
We did 5,000 acres that day.
That's the day I got a thorn in my calf. I couldn't walk. I couldn't walk for 3 days.
And it came out how many years later?
It was 7 years later that thorn.
It finally came out.
All the way through?
Huh?
Work all the way through?
No, it came back out. They said it would cause more damage cutting it out than just let it work its way out.
But conversely, we went to some beautiful spots. Went to that was near Hoodoo Bowl before we went to that wilderness area, was it? Does that sound right?
Up on the side of
The ski area.
Shasta
everybody's
Mountain.
not good for it.
Yeah.
Anyway, we were high ridge, and you could see out
we were
across
sitting
there.
out on a peak.
Brought the meals in by the
That's-
pack train, the food.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Oh,
Took
yeah.
them 2 days to get it there, though.
Yeah.
Took a while.
But
Some
the
of the
other pretty one
dishes.
was-
Oh yeah,
On the
I forgot that. Yeah, they brought up cans of beans or something like that for us. No, when I say cans of beans, I'm talking about 5-gallon cans.
Yeah.
Baked beans
Yeah.
in it.
Hot cans. Yeah.
And they would be just a little bit musky, but they were good.
Well, remember Montana, though? They brought those scrambled eggs in on those
Yeah.
5-gallon cans,
Yeah,
and they were green. Green
Yeah.
scrambled eggs by the time
Sure.
we got there.
That
That was
was-
fine.
You know, the food was good when they first started back in the 60s, and then they had the brilliant idea to do the fishnet dinners. I mean, we used to go to California on fires, like Russ was saying, and they'd have the California penal system people did a lot of the cooking. And you'd go through the line there, and, you'd get a big old chunk of T-bone, and if that wasn't enough, you just go back and get in line again, you get another one. I think it was 1968, whatever the year of the 4th of July mountain fire was at Chelan. Remember that?
Yeah.
That was the year we first saw the
68.
fishnet dinners where they just brought out the garbage cans with boiling water and you threw them in there.
They're all frozen and everything.
They're all frozen. And you just ate those. That was really...
It was interesting.
I don't know who had that idea, but it was a bad idea.
And there were 2 results of that. You either got constipated or you got the trots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to tell you one of my favorite stories of the Bushmen before I have to leave here. I'm sorry I have to leave. 1967, after we finished the initial training period, we were having a kegger over at Daroga Park, which is on the other side of the Columbia River here, and we were lit up, to say the least. So we got a fire call. Chuck got a hold of us. Got a fire call to go to the North Sam's fire. Remember to this day, over in the Olympic National Forest. So that's called Russ and Dave and everybody got us together. The squad leaders got headed back up to our bunkhouse up the river. We got to the bunkhouse. We had a guy on the crew then. His name was James Clausen. I think he's passed now. I think he's passed now. Jet black hair, worst hair in a crew cut with the front part up and black horn rim glasses.
He's a chemist.
He's a chemist, yeah. But when we got back to the barracks up the river, Jim Clausen was not awake, totally passed out. They got him out of the rig. And Chuck, I remember what Chuck said to this day. He goes, "We're not leaving anybody behind. You take that son of a bitch across the river, you stick your fingers down his throat, you get him to throw up, but he's going." When we got to Pangbourne, we literally had to load James Clausen onto the DC-3. He couldn't walk to get on. That was one of my favorite stories of the old Bushman crew.
Well, if you can remember that, can you remember the Wolfman standing up on a stump? It was probably about 2 o'clock in the morning or something like that, and he says, "Now how was that beer?"
Yeah, that's right. How do you guys feel now?
That's the only flight I didn't remember.
Yeah.
Because I passed out and I sat in the seat. And I woke up and I said, "When are we going to take off?" And we had already landed at the fire. I said, "Oh, God, that's going to be a long day."
That was not untypical, but
Yeah.
I just remember 007. We called him 007, James Clausen. He was a good guy.
Remember him talking about being an amoeba.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
That's all he would say.
You remember more than I do about it. I'm an amoeba. I'm nothing but an amoeba.
This is amoeba.